There was a woman in her early 70s who often said the same thing. I'm too old for that. Not in a dramatic way, just casually, without thinking. At first, it seemed harmless, just a phrase, something people say. But over time, those words began to shape her choices. She stopped trying certain things, stopped going certain places, stopped exploring. Nothing forced her to stop. She chose to. And one day, she realized something unsettling. It wasn't her age that was limiting her life. It was a single thought she had repeated for years. Most mornings, for Margaret, followed a rhythm she didn't really think about anymore. She would wake up slowly, sit on the edge of the bed for a few seconds, then slide her feet into her slippers and walk toward the kitchen. The house was always quiet at that hour. She would press the coffee maker button, stand there for a moment, watching the dark liquid drip into the pot, steam rising, slow and steady. Sometimes, she stayed there longer than needed, as if those quiet seconds gave her time to think, even if she didn't know exactly about what. With her cup in hand, she walked to the living room, lowered herself into the same chair by the window. That chair had become part of her routine, a place where mornings passed without much change. She would glance outside, almost automatically. And there they were again, the small walking group, moving past her house. Comfortable shoes, light jackets, talking to each other as they walked. Not rushing, just moving. Margaret watched them over the edge of her cup, pretending she wasn't really paying attention. But deep down, she noticed how steady their steps looked, how natural it seemed for them to be out there, together. Her mornings felt different, still quiet, predictable. One morning, a soft knock sounded at the door. Margaret placed her cup down, pushed herself up from the chair, and walked slowly to answer it. When she opened the door, her neighbor Linda stood there, already dressed for the walk. "Morning," Linda said with a friendly smile. "We're heading out. Just a short walk around the block." Margaret smiled politely, resting one hand against the doorframe. Linda hesitated for a second, then added, "You should come with us sometime. It's nothing difficult." For a brief moment, Margaret paused, not because she couldn't walk, not because she didn't have time, but because a familiar thought, one she had used many times before, rose quietly in her mind, and almost without thinking, she shook her head gently. "Oh no," she said, "I'm too old for that." The words came out so easily, so naturally, as if they had been waiting there, ready to be used. Linda nodded kindly, waved goodbye, and walked back toward the sidewalk. Margaret closed the door, returned to her chair, and picked up her coffee again. Everything looked the same as before, but somewhere, quietly, a small thought lingered. When had those words, "I'm too old," started deciding things for her before she even had a chance to try? For the rest of that morning, Margaret tried to ignore the thought. She turned on the television, not really watching, just letting the sound fill the room. Her coffee had cooled slightly, but she kept sipping it anyway, eyes drifting back toward the window without meaning to. Outside, the walking group passed again, this time returning from their route. Their steps looked steady, relaxed, like it was something they had done many times before. Margaret shifted in her chair, pulling the blanket on her lap just a little tighter. Not because she was cold, but because something inside her felt unsettled. Later that afternoon, she moved into the kitchen to prepare lunch. Nothing complicated, just toast, eggs, something simple. She had made hundreds of times before. She stood at the counter, holding the pan handle, watching the eggs cook slowly. And without warning, that sentence came back to her mind again. "I'm too old for that." She said it earlier so casually, without even thinking. But now, standing there alone in the kitchen, she wondered where that thought had come from. When did she first start saying it? Had someone told her that once, years ago? Or had she told herself enough times until it started to feel true? She placed the toast onto a plate, sat down at the table, and stared at the food for a moment before eating. Not hungry yet, just thinking. It felt strange how one simple sentence could appear so quickly and end a possibility before it even began. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized something uncomfortable. That phrase hadn't just been used once. It had been used many times, quietly, repeatedly, over months, maybe years. Each time, closing a small door before she ever stepped close enough to open it. That evening, Margaret sat on the sofa, holding her phone in one hand. Her granddaughter had sent her a message earlier that day. A short video, something cheerful, something meant to make her smile. She tapped the screen slowly, watching the video play. Bright colors, quick movement, cheerful music. It looked simple enough. But when her granddaughter later asked, "Grandma, did you like it?" Margaret hesitated, not because she didn't like it, but because using the phone, learning new things, always made her feel slightly unsure. She stared at the screen, thumb resting above the buttons. And again, that same familiar sentence appeared. "I'm too old for this." Not spoken out loud this time, just whispered quietly in her mind. It was subtle, almost invisible, but powerful in a quiet way. Because every time she believed that thought, she stepped back from something new. Every time she stepped back, her world became just a little smaller. Less movement, less challenge, less discovery. Later, she placed the phone on the table, leaned back into the sofa, and let out a slow breath. She didn't feel weak. She didn't feel incapable. But she did feel cautious. More cautious than she used to be. And somewhere deep inside, she began to notice a pattern forming. Not because her body had changed overnight, but because her thoughts had started deciding what she believed she could no longer do. The next morning, Margaret followed her usual routine again. Slippers on, coffee brewing, chair by the window, waiting. But something felt slightly different this time. Not outside, inside. As she lifted her cup, she noticed the walking group approaching once again. Same steady rhythm, same easy conversation, same movement. She watched them quietly, longer than usual. Then, without planning it, she set the cup down on the table. Not finished yet, just paused. Her eyes stayed on the sidewalk, following their steps as they passed. And for the first time, instead of repeating the usual sentence, she asked herself a different question. What if I'm not too old? Just out of practice. The thought felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, but also strangely interesting. She stood up slowly, walked toward the front door, rested her hand on the handle, not opening it, just standing there, feeling the hesitation, the uncertainty, the quiet debate happening inside her mind. It wasn't about walking. Not really. It was about the belief that had been guiding her choices for far longer than she realized. And now, for the first time, she was beginning to question it. That afternoon, Margaret sat at the small table near the window. A notebook lay open in front of her, pen resting between her fingers. She didn't write often, but today felt different somehow. Outside, sunlight moved slowly across the floor, touching the edge of the table, then fading as the hours passed. She tapped the pen lightly, thinking about the word she had used so many times. I'm too old. Such a simple sentence. Short, quiet, easy to say. But now, when she repeated it silently in her mind, it sounded different, heavier, more final, as if it closed possibilities. Before they had a chance to appear, she leaned back in her chair, looked toward the window again. Across the street, someone was watering plants near the front porch. Slow movements, steady hands. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, just doing what they could, with the time and strength they had. And suddenly, Margaret understood something she hadn't seen before. Aging wasn't only happening in her body, it was happening in her thoughts, in the words she repeated, in the limits she accepted, without ever testing them. She lowered her gaze, wrote a few quiet words onto the paper, not a long sentence, just a simple reminder. Maybe try first, because sometimes the thought that makes a person feel older is not the number of years behind them, but the belief that something is no longer possible before they even take the first step.